Okay, how's everybody doing today? Well, it's still Saturday, and I'm making my second post, and I'm doing it from my car again. Sorry, Kevin, I'm going to post and drive. I figure it's probably no different than me having a passenger in the car and talking to him, because I'm talking to a passenger. But we'll see, I'm kind of weird about driving in that if I feel like stressed out, like I've been on the phone before and the traffic got real weird, and I'll just throw the phone down on the ground and call him back later and say, sorry about that. I wasn't feeling real comfortable. Anywho, today I wanted to talk about my father passed away a few years ago, and my father was born and raised a Catholic, but really had nothing to do with the church at all. I told you that story. He told that advice he gave me one day when I was about 9 years old, and he came and sat on my bed and said, "The measure of a man, son, is how much money he makes and how many women he sleeps with." Yeah, that was my role model of a father. But he was sweet to me, and he was kind. He never, he never spanked me one time, which, he probably should have. I'm sure I deserved a couple of whoopings, but he didn't. He wasn't like that. His mother and father were horribly mean to him. He tells the story that his mother never, ever even hugged him. He had no memory of her even touching him, like rubbing his chest or, his shoulder, or, even his hair or anything like that. She was one of those clean-aholics. She was OCD, I guess. And he had terrible memories of her. And really, one of the only pet peeves I had against my dad when I got older was that I told him, I said, how could you let us go over to her house when you knew what she was doing? She used to lock us in this little basement. It was called a fruit cellar. Anybody from the north knows what those are. And so she could do her house cleaning. And, she'd lock us in there for, I say us, I'd be there alone. My brothers went at different times. And for hours. And it was, I want to say 4x4. The house was 100 years old, so you can imagine how dirty the thing was. It was one little window and spiders everywhere. To this day, I hate spiders. I mean, I'll kill them for my wife and daughter, but I really don't like spiders at all. So, I was, 4, 5, 6, and I told my dad, how could you send us over there knowing she would treat us like that? And he's like, oh man, I'm sorry. So, my father, my grandmother was a staunch Catholic, went to church, 3 times a week. So my father, he just rebelled, I'm sure. And he had nothing to do with church at all. Never made us go. It wasn't a big deal. We grew up, believing in God. Like I always say about wonderful Catholic people, they're loyal to their faith. They know who God is. They know who Jesus is. And they know who the Holy Spirit is. They just don't have a relationship with him. What is it in James? I think he says, oh, you say you believe in God? Good for you. Even the devil believes in shudders. It's a relationship, people. I keep telling y'all, it's a relationship. It's a relationship. It's a relationship. Knowing who Michael Jordan is doesn't get you access to go have lunch with Michael Jordan. But if you were Michael Jordan's brother, you could probably call him up and say, hey bro, come on, let's go get a burger, because you got to have that relationship. It's the same thing with the father and the son. You got to have a relationship, y'all. So anyways, my father has no relationship with God. When I turned 30, I got saved, and that might tell you how old I am. I'm getting kind of old. I'm actually a lot older than, I'm probably older than you guys think. Anywho, once I got, to a level of maturity in the Word, I started to, talk to my father about, salvation. And my father, he put up the wooden stakes, like in the shape of a cross, like, get away from me and leave me alone. I want nothing to do with it. What he would do is he would just his eyes would glaze over and he was gone. He was somewhere else. You could tell he didn't want anything to do with that conversation. He would go off. So I realized shortly that I wasn't ever going to get to my father like that. So what I did was, my father was a guy's guy. He loved sports. He liked to talk about politics. He hated Hillary Clinton. Oh my gosh, he used to talk terrible about Hillary Clinton. Hey, my parents lived in upstate New York, and I'm in Texas, and they would come down for a visit. They came down once during the summertime, and then once around Christmas time. And they would come down because, they didn't travel that much. They were getting older. They would come down for 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks, It was like a mini vacation to them. And my father would come down, and I'd have to tell him, he'd be talking so harshly because, my father was, when he retired, he was a bartender, to make extra money, plus his Social Security and his retirement. He worked at Kodak. He was a bartender, and, he was around bars. And so his speech and his vocabulary was, that which you would hear if you were hanging around bars. And I would have to tell him all the time, stop it, because my kids were little back then. The son probably was 9, and my other son was 2 or 3, or even when my daughter was 2 or 3, and my middle son was 6 or 7, and my other son was 13. It was like, Dad, you can't talk like that around my kids. I would chastise them all the time. Who's the adult here, Dad? Who's the adult? And as I got older, I developed a really close relationship with my father. When I was younger, in my 20s, because his parents were so cold, his father was just mean to him. He never said his story goes, his father never said one kind word to him his entire life, but only called him stupid and useless. My grandfather was one of those guys. He could fix anything. He could do electrical. He could do plumbing. He could lay tile. He could lay brick. He could do anything. And my father was a jock. He got a scholarship to go play baseball in college. He didn't end up going because he tore his a tendon in his elbow his senior year. And then after that, when he couldn't play baseball anymore, he picked up bowling. He became a professional bowler. He was a professional bowler. He was on the PBA. So he was a great athlete. So he was different than his father. My father couldn't fix anything. I remember one time he went out and he bought a lawnmower, and he brought it home. He was all proud of himself. I was like 6. I remember this clearly, y'all. And he pulls it out of the trunk, and he extends the handle, and he gets down there, and he pulls it, and he starts it up, and he starts mowing lawn, and it stalls out on him. So he goes and gets our neighbor, who's a real handyman, and the guy comes over, and he's like, what were you doing? He said, well, I just brought it back. I just picked it up from the hardware store. I took it out of the trunk. I pulled the handle, the cord, it starts up. I start mowing the lawn. I get 30 feet, and it stops. And the guy opens something, looks at it, he goes, you didn't put any oil in it, Joe. He didn't put any oil in it. That's the way my father was. He didn't know anything about anything that was mechanical. He didn't, but he was a great athlete. That was his thing. So he liked to talk about sports. So as I was getting older, I remember when I was in my 20s, I went home to visit my parents. I was in Texas. I came to Texas when I was 18 or 19. I left home. I was gone as soon as I could get out. As soon as I was old enough to go, I came down to Texas. And I went home. My business was jamming. I was making a pile of money. I was really, really, really successful. For 22, 23 years old, I had probably $250,000 in the bank, stocks, bonds. I was doing great. I was high on life. I was living good. And I remember I went home, and my dad was laying on the couch, and I said, hey, your son is here. I hadn't seen him for 2 years. He was like, hey, yeah, how are you? How's it going? And I said, really? That's the way you're going to treat me? I go running down there, and I jumped on him. He's laying on the couch. Now, I'm big. I'm lifting weights. I'm huge at this time. I'm like 185 pounds. And my father's a little guy. He's just a little Italian. He's probably 5'8", 165 pounds, soaking wet. And I'm all muscular. So I go running and jump on him, and I get him in a headlock, and he's like, get off me, get off me. He's trying to push me. Now, I don't, up to this point in my life, I don't ever remember my father saying, I love you. Again, my memory is he was nice to me. He wasn't like his father was to him. He really did a much better job than his parents did with him. But you can't give out what you don't have. If you don't get love, you don't know how to give love. And he really never loved me. He didn't know how. So I was bound and determined to get something out of him, y'all. So I jump on him, and I'm kissing him on the head. Tell me you love me. I'm not getting up to you. Tell me you love me. And he's like, get off me. You know, Italians don't do that. They're very macho. They don't do that kind of stuff. But he's not strong enough to get me off of him. He's trying to push me off, but I got him in a headlock. And I'm bigger than he is. Way bigger at this point. Like, I'm not moving till y'all, this went on for 15 minutes. My mother is standing at the top of the stairs laughing her butt off. She is cracking up. She can't, because she knows, you know, I mean, she has the same problem with him. He can't show affection to anybody, not even her. I mean, nobody. He was kind of a miserable cusp. And this going on for 15 minutes, I'm getting tighter and tighter with my headlock. I'm kissing him on the forehead. Tell me you love me. Tell me you love me. Tell me you love me. He's like, fine. I love you. It's like, okay. And I got up. But from that day on, every time we talked on the phone, he never said goodbye until he said, I love you. Something broke in him that day. That day, y'all. So, I'm not going to worry about the time because people keep telling me don't worry about the time. So I'm not going to worry about the time. I'm just having fun here. So, I'm saved now. I'm older. I've got my own family. My daughter is born 2000, and I'm starting to get really close to my dad. I liked politics. Back then, I was very much into politics. I wanted to know what was going on. I'm extremely conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm from Texas, y'all. It's just the way I am. And I'm Christian, you know. It's hard to be a Christian and a liberal. The two almost really don't go hand in hand. But I understand you people that are on the West Coast. I know what it's like. Y'all are surrounded in liberalism. But, you know, I kind of tend to lean along the side of Margaret Thatcher when she said, the problem with liberalism, eventually, you run out of other people's money. I just love that. Like, yeah, actually, that's correct. But anyways, regardless, I don't care. I just love people now. I've gotten to the place where politics are unimportant to me. I'm not even concerned. As far as I'm concerned, it's all a big dog and pony act, Republican or Democrat. I don't think it matters. I think they're all players. Very rarely do you find somebody who's a man of his word, a man of his honor. The last one I knew was Ron Paul, and he was from Texas too. He was the bomb. I've seen him speak in person. I've been to many places where Ron Paul's been, and he was the real deal. He truly knew who the bad guys were and was out to get them. And I'm surprised he was still alive. I think they just considered him, I don't know. This is let him live, I guess. So anyways, as I'm getting older, I'm getting wiser, and I'm trying to talk to my dad about things, and I would bring him down and take him out with my friends. You know, he never had any Christian friends. He was never around any Christians, and my dad liked to smoke cigars. So once again, I took up cigar smoking. I didn't inhale cigars. You know, I just puffed on a cigar, but I never inhaled the darn thing. I'm an athlete. I'm not letting anything like that in my body. But, you know, I mean, he didn't know. He didn't, you know, whatever. So he liked to play poker. We'd play poker, and I'd have my taekwondo guys come over. We'd all play poker. And he loved that camaraderie. And he would say to me, you know, you got really nice friends. I like your friends. Well, my friends are all Christians, and they're all talking about Jesus. We're sitting around playing poker, talking about Jesus, talking about church, talking about this, talking about that. You know, we're talking about Christian stuff. And even if we're not, we're talking about whatever we're talking about from a Christian point of view. You know, it's hugely different than the atmosphere he's from, and he came to really like it. He liked my friends. He liked the way they acted and the way they behaved and the way they treated each other. You know, he liked that people weren't, cussing and, you know, acting a fool or fighting. You know, my friends were cool. And he wanted to spend more and more time here around us. See, it was a good influence on him. And nobody ministered to him, because whenever they tried, you could see his eyes glaze over. And I would tell him all the time, just change the subject. I had one friend try and lead him to salvation. I mean, he was really trying. And my dad's eyes just glazed over. He became like a zombie. And my friend looked at me and I was like, just change the subject. And he started talking about Hillary Clinton. My dad perked back up. Oh, it was hilarious. It was hilarious. So for 20 years, y'all, my brother and I really, and as my father got to 70, we both realized, hey, we're running out of time. And I started, getting a little more serious, and we would get in conversations on the phone, and I would start bringing it up about salvation, and you could hear him go dead silent. And I would try and pull it, Dad, listen to me. Hey, stop it. Stop zoning out on me. Talk to me about this thing. And I got him to actually, open up a little bit, but I never got him to do it. I never got him to do it. He would never do it. He would acknowledge it. He would acknowledge Jesus. And later, in our conversations, he would even talk about God. He would talk about Jesus. He would talk about people that were Christians and how he liked this politician or that politician or this athlete that was a professed Christian. So it was changing him slowly, but it wasn't fast enough, y'all. I mean, I'm really stepping up the pressure here. I'm walking this fine line of trying not to alienate him, but trying to get him to understand the urgency of time is short. So, my daughter is 6 at this time, and I'm tucking her into bed. And she says to me, she says, Daddy, yes, baby, is Grandpa saved? And I said, honey, I don't really think so. I'm working on him. You hear me working on him? She's like, well, let's pray about it, okay? I said, yeah. Okay, let's pray about it. I can do that. Let's do that. Come on. I knelt down next to her bed, and she prayed, and I prayed, and then we prayed together, and it was all good, right? So the next morning, I'm driving her to school. She's in the back seat. My son is next to me. My kids went to a private school. I sent them to a Christian school. I wouldn't put them in public school. Y'all people that are worried about martial arts being from the devil and kids learning some sort of I don't know, something there. You got more to worry about public school than anywhere else. That's a cesspool what they teach those kids. Oh my gosh. Daddy's got, Heather's got 2 daddies. Buddhism, Islam, atheism. My gosh, you can teach Satanism in elementary, in public schools now, but God forbid you say the name of Jesus, right? It's wrong. You got more to worry about that than any karate school, I'm telling you. So anyways, I'm driving my kids to school in the morning, and I hear my daughter sniveling. She's crying. She's and I look in the rearview mirror, and she's just crying. I'm like, baby, what is the matter? She goes, I don't want Grandpa to go to hell. We got to tell him about Jesus, Daddy. We got to tell him about, oh my gosh, my heart, and I just grabbed my phone and I dialed his number and I stick it back to her and I said, tell him. And she's on the phone going, Daddy, or Grandpa, please, you got to make Jesus your Lord. Grandpa, you don't want to go to hell. Don't you want? And then she put on, she goes, don't you want to be in heaven with me? Don't you love me? My gosh, Grandpa, won't you do it for me? I'm sitting in the front seat going, yeah, give it to him, baby. My daughter was laying it down. Y'all, my daughter was 6 years old, and she was laying down salvation. She was telling him, Grandpa, you got to confess it with your mouth and believe it in your heart. You got to confess it. You got to, because my dad used to say, I think it in my mind. I think it in my mind. And I know that's what he said to her. I've said it in my mind, Maria. That's probably what he said. And she's going, that's not good enough, Grandpa. You got to speak it with your mouth, and you have to do it publicly. You got to tell somebody. Oh, y'all would have been so proud of this 6-year-old. She was awesome. And then she got quiet. So I know he must have shut her down somehow. She got real quiet. She was like, okay, okay. She got real somber. And she hands the phone back to me, and not to embarrass him, because I know how the Holy Spirit works, y'all. I just changed the subject, I was like, I probably changed it to sports. What about those Texans? They need a quarterback, something like. He loved sports and he loved politics. You could always get him going with two subjects, sports or politics. And about I want to say 2 weeks later, this is, I want to say it's I don't know, about 2 weeks later, I'm at the counter, got my laptop out, doing my taxes. I'm engrossed. I told you about that man brain thing. I'm just like into my taxes. I'm logging stuff and trying to figure out deductions. I'm self-employed, so it's there's a lot of work involved. And I had everything on Quicken, but some of the stuff didn't. I was entering stuff I purchased with cash. You have to enter that in. You have to do it by hand. So I'm entering those transactions in, and the phone rings. I pick up and I see my dad on it. I pick up the phone, and he says, "Hey, let me talk to Maria." So hey, fine. I'm busy anyways. Maria, come get the phone. She comes. I hand her the phone, and I don't even remember what happened after that. I have no memory. That's it. So 3 days later, y'all, I get a phone call from my brother. My father had a massive heart attack and died. And I left my dad. He was a hoot. So I was sitting there on my bed, and I was just so sad, y'all. I was crying. My dad was in hell, and it just was breaking my heart. I was so sad. And my daughter came in my bedroom, and she sat down next to me, and she said, "Why are you crying?" I said, "Because I'm sad for Grandpa. I'm sad for where he is." She goes, "Why would you be sad for where he is? He's in heaven." And I looked at her and I said, "What?" She goes, "He's in heaven." I said, "And how do you know that, little girl?" And she goes, "Because he confessed Jesus as his Lord to me on the phone." And I said, "When did he do that?" She said, "Don't you remember a couple of days ago when you were on the computer and you were working, he called me?" And I'm going back in my memory, and I'm like, "Yeah, I do." She goes, "Well, when I got the phone, he said, 'Hey, Maria, I wanted to tell you first. I wanted you to be the first one. I just made Jesus the Lord of my life. And like you told me, I got to tell somebody. So I'm telling you, Jesus is my Lord." And she was praying with him in the other room, and they were just hooting and hollering and carrying on. It's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? My daughter led my father to salvation. She did something in 3 days that I couldn't do in 20 years, y'all. 20 years. Are you hearing me? So one of the lessons I learned from that was, when people ask me, they say, pray for my wayward son or this person, they're not saved. I pray that God would bring laborers to their field, somebody that they respect, somebody that they admire, somebody they would receive from. Because sometimes a prophet isn't received in his own home, y'all. Sometimes they don't get it from us. Sometimes they're not gonna receive from us. We're just too close to them. Like they told Jesus, "Who are you? You're the bastard son. You were conceived out of wedlock. We're not going to listen to you." They didn't believe Jesus because of the history and the story of Mary getting conceived by the Holy Spirit. They didn't believe that story. They thought she got knocked up. So I wanted to tell you that story. Now the story goes on. I'm going to keep telling it. I don't care. Maybe y'all that are bored with me can hang up or turn it off or whatever. But the story goes on. Listen to this, y'all. All right. So I got two brothers, right? I got a brother that's 1 year older than me and a brother that's 2 years older than me. The brother that's 1 year older than me, him and I are really close. We were close when we were kids. We played together. We played hockey together. We did taekwondo together. I left home early. He stayed back in New York. After I left, he got addicted to drugs and alcohol real bad. But God performed a miracle in my life with one of my businesses where actually I had to fire one of my partners, and it left me a location with nobody to run it. I called my brother up. listen to this. Here's another sidetrack of the story. I called my brother up one day, and I said, bro, you've been talking about coming to Texas for 10 years, and now I need you. I'm not asking you to come anymore. I'm telling you, I need you to come here and run this taekwondo school for me. I had to fire one of my partners because he flaked out on me. So my brother tells the story that night, the night before I called him, he was so strung out on cocaine and alcohol that he was contemplating his suicide. He said, I was seriously planning it. I thought about doing it the next day. The day that I called him in the morning and said, get your butt down to Texas. And he jumped in a car and came right down. And, you know, he was a mess for a while. But, you know, God took the drug and alcohol addiction away from him. He got saved, filled with the Holy Spirit. Now he is freaking awesome. I'm telling you guys, he is the bomb. So I've got this older brother, my brother Rick. And he's a strange bird, man. From the time we were kids, you know, my brother Chris and I, we were like athletes. My brother Rick, you know, and he was a good athlete too. He could do all kinds of sports. He played hockey, football, baseball. He could do it all. But that's not where his heart was. His heart was, you know, when we were really young, he had Rick's Zoo. He would go out into the woods. We, you know, in upstate New York, we had woods behind our house. And he'd go catch all these critters, bring them home, and he made a zoo. You know, I remember one time we were eating dinner, and it was summer out. We had the window open, and our cat jumps up on the windowsill and runs in the middle of the dining room table while we're eating a spaghetti Italian dinner on a Sunday afternoon and dropped a crawfish right in the middle of the table, you know, that she pulled out of Rick's Zoo. I wonder if my brother remembers that. I'm going to ask him tonight when I see him. I'm on my way to a crawfish boil, by the way. Maybe I'll talk about that later. I don't know. So where was I? So my brother Rick, who's a strange bird, now he really is great at building mechanical things. He's a genius at fixing stuff. He gets into bikes, motorcycles. He can build anything. He can fix anything. Well, you know, he's a different bird than my brother and I. He ain't like us. He's different. And later on in his life, you know, he was wild. He was pretty tough. He joined the Hells Angels, y'all. And I'm not playing here. I'm not talking about a biker group. I'm talking about the Hells Angels. And they are every bit as bad and worse than anything you ever heard of them. You know, when Giuliani took down the mob in the 80s, the mob was getting destroyed. They were going to jail, federal prison, left and right, boom, boom, boom. Because I'm from a town, Rochester, it was all run by, you know, Goombas, all mobsters. And then when they got taken down, the Hells Angels come in, they took over. They ran all the prostitution, they ran all the drugs, they did all the crime, they did all the extortion. You know, you had to pay the Hells Angels for protection money, not the mob anymore. But the mobsters were still around. They were just more in a low profile thing. So you had two satanic factions there. The mob, which was they still had their stronghold, but the Hells Angels had an equal hold. And my brother was a Hells Angel. All right, that's a whole nother testimony. That's a whole nother story. I lived a strange life, y'all. I lived an interesting life. I did. So my brother's a Hells Angel, and I go home to my father's funeral, and my mother asked me to do the eulogy because, you know, I was probably the closest to my father of anybody, of anybody really. I was probably the closest to him. We talked on the phone every day. Him and I got along great. So so I get there, and one of the things I did was I was telling him this story of how Maria led him to salvation. But you got to understand, out of respect, all the Goombas show up. My father wasn't a mobster, but because he was a professional bowler, the mobsters thought he was like the bomb. And when he was in high school, he was the star pitcher, and all the guys that he went to high school with went and got in the mob, you know, because there was really nothing to do in Rochester. You were either worked for Kodak or you were in the mob, and most of them went in the mob. So they respected him because he was an athlete, and you know, and he was cool to hang around. You could say, you know, my friend, my buddy's a professional bowler, because you know how the mobsters are. They want to rub elbows with bigwigs. So all the mobsters liked my dad. You know, my dad tells a story that he took me to a place one time, and the head mobster, his name was Blackie, liked me so much, wanted to buy me. Offered my dad $100,000 for me, and my dad was like, no, I don't know. I could tell it to my wife. You know, it sounds like a good deal, but I'd have to go home and explain it to my wife. You know, and he would tell that with a straight face. He really wanted people looking at him like, come on, Dad. It's like, no, really, you know, hey, come on, $100,000 back in 1964? That's a whole lot of money. That's like a couple of $1 million now. And, you know, if you think about it with the cost of inflation, he's right. So anyways, so all the mobsters are coming. You know, my father was popular. He knew a lot of people. This church was big. It had to seat 500, 700, 800 people easy, maybe 1,000. I would say 1,000. And when you're in the Hells Angels, out of respect, they have to show up. They don't have the choice. They come from nearby cities. And my brother joined the Hells Angels out of this other biker club. So he was in like the Horsemen, and then he got in the Hells Angels from the Horsemen. So there were 2 biker clubs there, not just one. So on one side of the church was full of bikers. There had to be 500 of them. And the other side of the church was full of Goombas, the mafiosos. It was hilarious. I remember my brother and I stand up in the front, just look at them, go, look at this, bro. Bikers on one side, Goombas on the other. You think we're going to have a war here? And they don't like each other. Y'all hear what I'm saying? They're not friends. They're not friends. Oh, no. They're not friends at all. It's really quite funny, guys. Really quite funny. So, I'm going through the toll booth here. I want to make sure that I'm going down the correct road. So I'm up there and I'm giving the eulogy, y'all, to Goombas, who are generally not tender-hearted people, right? They're not. And bikers, who are some of the hardest people you'll ever meet in your life. They are. These people are rough. They're bad to the bone. They're everything their reputation says they are. So I'm up there and I give this testimony of my daughter leading my father to salvation, and there isn't a dry eye in the house, y'all. Not one person is not crying. Everybody, those bikers, you should see those bikers, man, trying to hide, wiping their tears away and act tough. Oh, it was hilarious. It was hilarious. We were cracking up about it afterwards, y'all. It was so funny. Everybody was crying. The Goombas were crying. The bikers were crying. We cracked up afterwards. My mother and my brother and I and my wife, and we all went to dinner afterwards. We were laughing about it. We were chuckling. Oh man, it was a good time. It was a good time. So I'm gonna let y'all go because I gotta get on my GPS and figure out where the heck this guy lives. I'm going to a crawfish boil, y'all. I was invited to a crawfish boil. My poor wife is working. She's unhappy about this. She loves crawfish. I love my wife. I love you, Angela. And I'll talk to y'all later. Bye. Maybe I'll post on the way home. I don't know. Talk to you later. Bye.